It was about 20 years ago, maybe less, maybe more. I can't remember. My memory doesn't serve me that well. Someone forwarded to me an article in a Texas newspaper, one of my many colleagues probably. The article consisted of an interview with the then president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Reverend William Sinkford. Sinkford had preached at one of those big Texas churches. They have some big ones there. Everything's bigger in Texas, as the saying goes. In his sermon, he mentioned that he felt that Unitarian Universalism's social witness would be taken more seriously by interfaith groups if the purposes and principles contained the word God. When he was interviewed later by a journalist, his comments were translated to mean that he intended to petition the Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees to add the word God to our then purposes and principles. This article quickly made its way to almost every Unitarian Universalist minister, and within a week, Bill Sinkford was deluged with 300 or 400 emails, dozens of telephone calls, and much disruption to his schedule, all just because of a misunderstanding in a Texas newspaper. If you haven't noticed, Unitarian Universalists sometimes have a problem with the word God. In our free faith, one can believe in God and the divine mission of Jesus, or believe in the feminine version of the deity, the goddess. One can believe something else, or doubt or deny belief in any deity whatsoever. Religion in our movement is less a matter of shared beliefs than it is a shared ethos. That ethos is that human beings are good regardless of their personal religious faith, and every human being is endowed with inherent worth and dignity. So, you may disagree with me and still be a worthwhile human being. That is part of the other part we have in our religious movement. Unitarian Universalist ministers have freedom of the pulpit to express the truth as they see it, and Unitarian Universalists have the freedom of the pew to disagree with their minister. It's part of what makes our faith what it is. So you may disagree with me. I accept that revelation is not sealed and the universe still has much to teach us. Yet in the midst of this discomfort that some feel about the word God, others draw strength from the notion of the divine. Today I want to tell you about theism and Unitarian Universalist faith. This is risky. In most of the Unitarian Universalist communities to which I have belonged or ministered, God was hardly ever mentioned. It is said in the past, the only time that God was mentioned during a Unitarian Universalist Sunday service was when the minister stubbed her toe on the way to the pulpit. Perhaps we fear divisive opinions about what we actually believe or do not believe. The richness in Unitarian Universalism is its ability to have the kinds of conversations in ways that no other religion could accept. And in this is the ability to be changed by that encounter with the sacred other, the person who is nearby. In that regard, it is good to talk about God every now and then, if for no other reason than it is good to know that other people's views of God motivate them to do good in the world. So, what is theism? Two definitions exist. The first one is the one everybody else uses. And when you're outside of a Unitarian Universalist context, it's the one that everybody assumes they know the definition for it. It's the one they're referring to. And the general community outside of Unitarian Universalism, theism is a belief in something or someone that one refers to as a god or goddess, or spirit or gods, In that sense, neo-pagans, Hindus, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Shinto believers, and believers in thousands of smaller religions are all theists. They all believe in some sort of supernatural being or beings. These religions have definite beliefs about God and the world and humanity through these beliefs. They practice rituals, educate the faithful. Most of them pray in a certain way. Theism in the Unitarian Universalist context means something different from the general definition. Theism among us means a belief in God or goddess or gods or spirits outside of the traditional beliefs of established religious movements. Let me say that again. It means for us a belief in God or goddess or gods or spirits outside of traditional beliefs of established religious movements or traditions. Taking a cue from the medical profession, theism in Unitarian Universalism is belief in a deity, spirits, unspecified. Theism for Unitarian Universalists holds that God does exist, but does not turn to God in the way that Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, neo-pagans, and other religious traditions believe. Theism is a free-floating belief in God, but resistance to saying God can be known beyond personal experience. That does not mean that theists in our movement are not informed by traditional religious views of God. They are often inspired by Christian prayer, Jewish prayer, Hindu ritual, and many other religious expressions. But that is not the only way that they believe about God. Theism is a belief in God or goddess or spirit that is not belonging to a historical religious tradition in our movement. Theism in our religious movement has deeper roots than one might imagine. The first generation of Unitarians in this country were definitely liberal Christian in their theology. The second generation, their children, however, grew up in the congregations and wondered why, if the congregation was not without creed, it still maintained much of the language and rituals of the Puritan movement. They wondered, if we are free to have our own beliefs, then why does the church that we're attending only follow a religious ceremonies and beliefs that are Christian? Recognizing the previous generation's examination of the Bible had discovered flaws, they wondered why their parents still held on to the scriptures as the ultimate source of revelation. They asked if other sources of God's revelation existed beyond their scriptures. They asked they wondered if they could experience God personally without turning to the revelation of the Christian tradition. This generational struggle came to a head with Ralph Waldo Emerson's address to the graduating class at Harvard University's Divinity School in 1838. Emerson belonged to the second generation of Unitarians. In fact, his own father was among the first generation of Unitarian ministers. Emerson's Divinity School address set the tone for the debate between the Unitarian clergy, and it almost was a very divided room when it was given. The professors were aghast, and there was a lot of grumbling and a lot of talking. And the younger ministers, a good portion of them were excited about what Emerson was saying. In his speech, Emerson pointed out that the natural world was not in accord with the scriptures, and that traditional Christianity had removed the sacredness of personal revelation in favor of community standards of truth. Emerson exhorted the graduating ministry students to take no models of ministry. This was a direct reference to Jesus. but rather, he said, to take revelation from direct intuition of God's presence. He encouraged them to find their own divine revelation and to found a different kind of church based upon their own spiritual discovery. Emerson never denied the importance of Jesus or his faith. He was trying to find a religious movement within the Unitarian movement of his day that would be based upon the kind of revelation that Jesus experienced, personal and authoritative. Emerson hoped that Unitarian leaders would find their own revelation with and beyond the Bible. He hoped that they would endeavor to find God in the world, in their own lives, from many different sources. At the time of the Divinity School address, Ralph Waldo Emerson was still a Unitarian minister, and his words were the founding reasoning behind theism, our larger religious movement, even today. Emerson later left the ministry, but attended Unitarian churches until his death. He sat on the back row and wrote criticism of the minister's sermons and then published it later on. He was well beloved by the Unitarian ministry, as you might imagine. Eventually, Emerson's theism became less controversial among Unitarians, and space was made for theism. Indeed, ours was probably the only religious faith before the Second World War that made a place for believing in God through personal revelation and without set interpretations or traditions. Emerson was also responsible for another idea about theism in our religious movement. He stated that he found the word God carried too much baggage. God was encrusted with more than 3,000 years of theological assumptions, the word God. For Emerson, one could not say God in the English language without the traditional Jewish or Christian theological beliefs associated with the word. Emerson encouraged others to find their own words to describe the God they experienced. In our responsive reading today, we experience Emerson's reference to God, which he called the Oversoul. That was what he found, the word he found, that made it meaningful for him. Many Unitarians and then Unitarian Universalists found that renaming God helped them pray and discover a deeper relationship with the Almighty. By calling God something other than God, they could name God as something different from traditional interpretations. God could speak through them with a new name. As my time as a Unitarian Universalist layperson then minister, I have known Unitarian Universalists to create many names for the God in whom they believed. One woman referred to God as divinity. She would say that she was praying to divinity. Another woman I knew told me that her prayers since her childhood had been to Trudy. That was her word for God. Maybe she needed a God who was like a little girl, like when she was a little girl, who would be able to understand where she was. Another woman I knew told me that her prayers were spoken as other people have spoken of God as Holy One, Mother and Father, Creator, Higher Power, and very commonly, Spirit of Life. Unitarian Universalists can be creative when seeking words to describe the God they believe in. For many of us, what we were told about God does not fit our personal worldview. Your mother's God, or the God you heard about in church or synagogue, or some other place, may not describe the God you believe in. Many Unitarian Universalists reframe God in ways that make sense and speak to their inner spirits. This is not making up God. This is a way of expressing the nature of God that they experience. Writes Unitarian Universalist minister Rebecca Parker, God is not an all-determining creator. Each creature is self-creating in relationship with all creatures, including God. So we are co-creators with the divine. We make God as much as God makes us. This is a conception of God very different from the one given to us by traditional religions. We are in mutual relationship with God, and in that sense, we are creating God as God is creating us. Then there's the other problem with God. Traditional beliefs about God state that God is all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere, and benevolent. The problem with this is that logically, each one of these traits cancels out the other under the right circumstances. For example, if God is good and powerful and all-knowing, how can terrible things happen? Wouldn't God protect us from harm? One answer to this conundrum is given by Unitarian Universalist minister Jane Malden. She writes, I would say that God is the creative force that has cast each of us into this world. God is the love in and between people. God does not willfully direct hurricanes onto the beaches of the unjust. God is the moral conscience that demands we walk these beaches hand in hand, building together where hurricanes have destroyed. I remember years ago, I served a congregation where there was a member of the congregation who was a scientist. He was kind of like Sheldon Cooper in The Big Bang Theory, if you know that series. Sheldon Cooper has very poor social skills, but has a brilliant mind. And this scientist said that he could not logically call himself an atheist because there had to be a space left open because nobody had conclusively proven that God did not exist. So agnosticism was the only intellectually appropriate response to theism in his perception. It was left unproven. None of us knows God completely. None of us knows absolutely whether God exists or not, even if we feel that aspect that Rosemary Bray McNatt mentioned. Even if we feel some presence, we cannot always be assured that that is real and not something like too much roast beef the night before. The human mind is kind of strange. As Unitarian Universalists, though, we will walk with each other and we seek truth. Whether we believe in God or not, we still believe in each other and the good to be found in the human spirit and the confidence that we can make the world a better place. Theism is one of the more common Unitarian Universalist theological expressions. It holds at its core that God is too great to be defined by only one theological interpretation or religious tradition. Theism among us is as self-defining as anything else is in our movement. For the freedom to find God or to find meaning without God, for a community that affirms us as we are, for a society that preserves our right to believe as we do and speak the truth as we see it. May we be truly grateful. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.